In 1517, German priest Martin Luther found that some of his congregation had been sold indulgences by the friar Johann Tetzel. Indulgences could be bought for several reasons: to help speed a soul through purgatory, or maybe to buy forgiveness for a particular sin in advance. After some inquiry, Luther found that Tetzel had been given permission by the Archbishop, who in turn had been given the right by Pope Leo X. Tetzel passed on a commission to the Archbishop, while the Archbishop passed his cut up to the Pope, who was using it to fund the rebuilding of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Luther found that Tetzel even had a cheap slogan: "When the coin in the coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs." Pope Leo X is alleged to have said upon his election, "Since God has given us the papacy, let us enjoy it." Luther sent a list of 95 complaints to Rome of what he saw as corruption in the church, and he also nailed a copy to the door of his church in Wittenberg. And so started the Reformation, the beginnings of Protestantism, and a European-wide war over one of the largest, richest and most powerful organisations the world has ever known. Historically, two other global institutions were known for their corruption: the British East India Company and the Soviet Union. When we look at the economic and cultural landscape today, much of it's dominated by equally monolithic organisations, this time digital ones. Do they pose a risk? And if so, what is it about these institutions that makes them dangerous? Under what circumstances does corruption flourish? How can we mitigate against the risks? The first thing that stands out about all these organisations is their size. But studies have shown that the size of a government, for example, doesn't necessarily increase the chances of corruption. The results from these studies have been mixed, but one 2012 study found that the size of government increased the likelihood of corruption when there are lower levels of democracy. Similarly, studies have shown that company size doesn't always correlate to corruption, but that larger firms seem to have more illegal behaviour in general. Another study set up an experiment where citizens had to apply for a driving licence at an official office. They found that when competition was introduced between offices, the likelihood of bribery lowered by more than 50%. So what's going on here? The primary cause doesn't seem to be size, or at least not just size, but monopoly. It's a loaded word, the connotations are usually economic, but I like this simple definition. A monopoly is the exclusive possession, control, or exercise of something. A thing can be anything: a product, a service, a route, a process, a communication. But when one person or organisation has sole control of the thing, the chances for corruption increase. We can fit this in with the other common criticisms of monopolies. First, lack of competition means the monopoly has less incentive to lower costs. Second, monopolies mean there's a lack of price or information signals from other organisations, people, places. One company can't see what another similar company in another town is doing, for example. Or one newspaper wouldn't be able to see what other stories other newspapers are writing. This is a problem of inefficiency. Third, monopolies can raise the barriers of entry. Big monopolies can buy out competitors, and this lowers innovation. Fourth, there's transparency, and this is specifically where corruption comes in. What happens behind closed doors? And finally, much harder to quantify, is the cultural and social power accrued by large organisations. The buying of political leverage, powerful lawyers, advertising, PR, spin. So how can we understand this philosophically? Thinking about corruption is the key. It links all the other criticisms together. One definition of corruption is the abuse of power by a public official for private gain. And this implies that there is something pure to be corrupted. This is where we're back to that thing, that person, some role, some service, some institution. What's called the causal theory of institutional corruption proposes that institutions can be defined as organisations that have some kind of human good as their purpose. These things have a purpose that's meant to relate to all of us in some way. As we've seen though, if a monopoly increases the chances of corruption, then corruption is more likely when a single actor has a monopoly on performing part of this human good. So if Tetzel's the only way you'll avoid purgatory, then you're going to pay the money. If you only get a promotion in the party structure of the Soviet Union through the sole guy above you, then you do what he asks. As we've seen, transparency can lead to a reduction in corruption, but what does this mean ontologically? We have this thing, ontologically, a phenomenon with a human good, and then we have the person or organisation with the monopoly over it. I'll call this a node. Transparency simply opens the thing to be viewed by others, to observe what's going on. We can connect another node to the process. We can see here why democracy is so successful. Democracy has multiple nodes: the press, the voter, supervisors, political parties, all with different perspectives on the phenomenon, whatever it may be. So, are big tech companies a risk? I think it's clear that they're monopolies, that they should be thought of as public utilities, because within them there are many processes that are being overlooked by single nodes. Algorithms are secret, decisions are in the hands of single people, bureaucratic management structures are singular. Law professor J. Sabil Rahman argues that Google, Facebook and Amazon are infrastructural firms, and infrastructural firms usually have a natural monopoly in a given area. These are different to other firms for a number of reasons. They have high sunk costs. That means that investment in building the network is huge, but in the past it accrues over time, so it makes competition from new organisations either inefficient or impossible. Second, the returns to scale have a different logic to normal companies. The value of a road network increases as the network does. The value actually lies in the network. We might be free to start a new water supply company, for example, but it's valueless if it's in a bubble. Whereas a company making coffee mugs isn't at a disadvantage because of the network of other coffee mugs that another company has. Each mug doesn't become more valuable because of their relationship to the other mugs. The value of big tech platforms increases dramatically the more users use them. Their value comes from the amount of connections, putting any competitor at a serious disadvantage. Infrastructure is usually quite simple as well. There's usually little room for innovation in the actual network itself. And finally, monopolies are particularly problematic when they are the sole providers of a public good, something that's a necessity. Power over the good can be arbitrary, corruptible. Someone could be denied access, for example, just because they're not liked by the owner. And in 1858 this actually happened when a gasworks denied a shopkeeper access to the gas. The Supreme Court in America argued that this was akin to governing people, and ruled that the gas company had to be reasonable, just, lawful, and not capricious, arbitrary, oppressive, or unreasonable. Rahman emphasises 3 points where these digital infrastructural monopolies might be problematic. The first is that they have gatekeeping power. They choose who has access and how they have access. The second is transmission power. These companies can choose how information flows through the platform. The same problem applies. And the third he calls scoring power. These companies have the power to judge us algorithmically, rate things by their own standards, decide how search results are ordered, etc. And all of this has a real-world effect. Rahman says that regulation should be focused on these powers and that government should be looking at fair access, non-discrimination, and user and data protection. And I'd argue that, like democratic systems, the more nodes that are able to view and contribute in some way to the infrastructure, the better it will be for all of us. Journalists, oversight bodies, inspections, politicians, competitors, antitrust laws, the public, should all in some way be able to contribute to and oversee what's going on. Ultimately, this debate should be both broad and specific. Much of the discussion about big tech so far has been broad but general. Thinking in terms of monopoly and corruption are one or two elements, but we need robust debate from all perspectives. Free speech, hate speech, town squares, public ownership, types of regulation, the specific histories of all of these, and the philosophies that underpin the arguments. Importantly though, we have to understand how this debate is different. History doesn't just repeat itself. We can't just rely on the same arguments about free speech or analogies about 19th century infrastructure, because the conditions and the context have changed. The debates should both draw on the past and be innovative. But to me it's clear that these big tech corporations are infrastructural in some way, have monopolistic tendencies, and statistically, historically, and philosophically are at risk at some point of some kind of corruption. If you like these videos, I need your help, and here's my request. If you think you get the same value from 4 of these videos as you do from just 1 cup of coffee, then please consider pledging just $1 per video. That's $3 to $4 per month to keep this channel going. You can even limit your pledge to $1 a month, and if you pledge $5, I'll add your name to the credits. To those that already support then and now, thank you so much. This channel just wouldn't exist without you. You can also hit like, share, follow me on Twitter and Facebook, etc. All of these things really contribute to helping then and now grow. Thanks for watching, and see you next week.